I fell madly in love with him and I wanted to impress him.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight on this Monday, April 8th.
When you have the support, that's when you call for the vote. That's what we're supposed to do.
Mayor Emanuel and Mayor-elect Lightfoot cut a deal on Lincoln Yards, confusing aldermen who were set to make a key vote today.
Our laws on marijuana have failed, and it's time for our state to address this.
Illinois could be just months away from legalizing marijuana. With Governor Pritzker out to get a graduated income tax through Springfield, we talk with two economists about the outlook for both the local and national economy. From the murder of Fred Hampton to the John Burge torture ring, a conversation about lawyers fighting police misconduct in Chicago for 50 years.
I fell madly in love with him and I wanted to impress him.
A story from the Wrigley Field bleachers where one fan's love for a beer vendor turned her into a baseball artist. And a look back at the Loyola Ramblers' magical season just 1 year ago when they went all the way to the Final Four. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Phil Ponce. Illinois joins other states to try and stop the president. Brandis Friedman has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Brandis.
Phil, Illinois is going to court with 20 other states in an effort to block the Trump administration's plans to build a border wall. In a motion filed late last week, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul joins a coalition of states arguing Trump's plan to divert $1.6 billion federal dollars from law enforcement, drug prevention, and military construction projects is unconstitutional. The group also claims construction of the border wall would harm environmental resources on the southern border in New Mexico. Raoul's office has also filed suit against Connecticut-based opioid manufacturer Purdue Pharma, claiming deceptive marketing practices led to an increase in opioid prescriptions despite the addiction epidemic sweeping many communities. We have more of that story on our website. The Environmental Protection Agency says it's preparing to remove lead and arsenic-tainted soil around more than 160 homes in East Chicago's Calumet neighborhood. The agency says this step should bring it closer to being done with exterior residential cleanups this year. Advocates working with neighbors in the northwest Indiana city say they still want the EPA to accelerate a study of the groundwater in the area and are concerned about how the EPA will remediate the former West Calumet housing complex. That's where 1,000 people were forced to evacuate in 2016 after tests found high lead levels in children and some yards. Since that year, the EPA has dug 582 properties in both Calumet and East Calumet, which are the Superfund site's two residential zones. The 95th Street terminal of the CTA's Red Line stop is not only a transit station, but also now it's a radio station, sort of. Today, the city unveiled the finishing touches to the recently completed station, and they include not only a DJ booth, but also pieces of visual art, both by renowned Chicago artist Theaster Gates. The 200-square-foot DJ booth and performance space is called An Extended Song of Our People, or ASOP for short, and will provide real-time programming played through the public address system. The visual art, called America, America, are a pair of large tapestries made from decommissioned fire hoses intended to formally materialize the history of the civil rights struggle in the U.S. After a rough start, losing 7 of their first 9 games of the season, the Cubs are happy to be home. At least it sure seems like they are. Mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot threw out the first pitch at the friendly confines, as she did last Friday on the South Side for the White Sox opener. And maybe she's good luck. The second inning double off the bat of Cubs pitcher John Lester opened the scoring for the home team, and they never looked back. Strong pitching by Lester and an avalanche of offense, and what do you know? Cubs beat the Pirates by a final of 10-0. Easy as that. Meanwhile, over at Guaranteed Rate Field, the Sox lost to the Tampa Bay Rays 5-1. As for the weather, mostly clear tonight with a low around 47, and then slightly cooler temps tomorrow with sunny skies and a high around 61. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Brandis. The much ballyhooed $6 billion Lincoln Yards project was all set for its penultimate vote today, a vote that was supposed to have sailed through. But then Mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot asked for a delay, to which Mayor Emanuel said okay, leaving the fate of the project up in the air. Paris Schutz has the latest. Paris, explain all this to us.
A lot of different parts moving here on the chessboard, Phil, or a lot of different pieces. The vote was to approve the $1 billion or more tax increment financing district that will help fund roads and bridges in this Lincoln Yards project that's slated to go along the Chicago River between Bucktown and Lincoln Park on the north side. It was, as you say, all set for a vote today until Lightfoot issued a statement late last night saying, quote, "From day one, I have raised concerns about these deals and the deeply flawed process that has led us to this moment. That's why I'm calling for the committee meeting tomorrow to be a transparent and fulsome subject matter hearing." She wanted it to be that instead of just a vote. So Mayor Emanuel responded this morning right before this Finance Committee meeting saying he's committed to delaying any project that Lightfoot doesn't like. Quote, "While I firmly believe in the value of these projects to the entire city, out of respect for her wishes and requests, I will honor my commitment and delay the vote." And that caused some confusion among city council members today at that pre-scheduled Finance Committee meeting, some of whom said they're still going to try and call for a vote, and they say it has more than enough votes to pass. But ultimately, the committee's chairman, the outgoing Alderman Pat O'Connor, says they will suspend this meeting. They will meet again Wednesday morning and perhaps try again.
The intent of which is to give the mayor-elect and the mayor of the city of Chicago an opportunity to determine whether or not they have a meeting of the minds on these projects that we are anticipating going through.
So what does this mean for the fate of the project?
Well, as you hear, O'Connor says maybe in the next couple days, Lightfoot and Emanuel will agree and there will be a vote. The project's #1 booster is 2nd Ward Alderman Brian Hopkins. He says he's confident it will pass no matter when the vote has taken place, but he says if council waits too long, the developer, Sterling Bay, might back out.
I'm not going to intentionally give the opponents of Lincoln Yards extra support for their position because I disagree with it. It's the wrong thing to do to the city of Chicago. Just like when New York City walked away from Amazon and said, no thank you, we don't want all those jobs. And there's a backlash to that today. There's an outcry when people realize what folly that is. I won't let that happen here.
Now, Sterling Bay, the developer, already has approval to begin building their project on the site of the former A. Finkel and Sons steel plant. It would call for mixed-use towers. I believe we have some drawings of it, of up to 600 feet tall, and retail and park space. There you go. The TIF would fund new bridges and road upgrades that you see in this area. Now, City Council also voted to delay a similar TIF that would fund a new neighborhood called the 78. That's a private development slated for a giant plot of land just south of Roosevelt Road and west of Clark.
So what might the end game of this delay be?
Well, Mayor Emanuel says no vote while he's in office, even though he likes this project, and that means Pat O'Connor, the alderman, will not schedule a vote for this. But any alderman in the Finance Committee can call for a vote on this. It doesn't stop anyone else from trying to call for a vote when they meet again on Wednesday. So the joint statements from Lightfoot and Emanuel make Lightfoot appear to be keeping a campaign promise to vet this project more. It makes Emanuel appear to be respectful of the new mayor's wishes, but if there is support for this deal, then it goes through anyway on Wednesday, despite what both mayor and mayor-elect want to do.
There's one more meeting before Lightfoot and the new aldermen are sworn in. Any other business tended to today?
Well, there was an ordinance that gives the rideshare company Lyft exclusive rights to operate the Divvy bike share system for the next 9 years. That's in exchange for $77 million that it will use to upgrade the bikes and upgrade the stations. So this passed the Transportation Committee today. There was also an attempt to pass a bill limiting outside employment for aldermen, an ethics bill. That stalled. It will probably be taken up once Mayor-elect Lightfoot takes office. So Wednesday, as I said, there will be another Finance Committee meeting, and it is the last full City Council meeting of this term, meaning Mayor Emanuel's last council meeting and the lame duck aldermen. It is their last chance to do any business before they leave.
Paris, thank you. And now to Carol Marine and two local economists on the outlook for both the local and national economy. Carol.
Phil, we've just heard Chicago's mayor-elect Lori Lightfoot has hit the pause button on the controversial tax subsidies for two huge real estate developments in the city. Meanwhile, Governor J.B. Pritzker is pushing for a graduated state income tax. So with a progressive agenda at the heart of both the mayor and the governor's, or the mayor-elect and the governor's plans, what's the economic outlook like for the city and the state? Joining us to share their insights are two of our favorites, Edward Stewart, Professor Emeritus of Economics at Northeastern Illinois University, and Michael Miller, Associate Professor of Economics at DePaul University. So as we were listening to Paris's report and we heard Alderman Brian Hopkins say we're not going to be New York and just say no to all those jobs, I saw you, Mike, sort of shake your head. What was your reaction?
Well, part of it has to do, I live out in the northwest suburbs in a place called Hanover Park, which is right next to Hoffman Estates, which is where Sears was. And Sears was going to be the salvation of that particular part of the Cook County area. And it turned out to be nothing. Sears is now a shell of its former self, and we got nothing out of it. And so I'm just philosophically opposed to people getting rent-seeking behavior and giving them special deals. I mean, I don't get special deals. Ed doesn't get special deals. I just think that's the wrong way to behave.
And your view on the Lincoln Yards and what the delay means, and you do live in Lincoln Park,
yes,
we should
yes.
hasten to add.
And have driven by the old Finkel Steel and now the empty plot of land right on the river, right on Armitage at the end of the 606 bike trail. As I was telling Mike earlier, it's probably the most advantageous piece of property in North America today. And the idea that you need a government subsidy to make it possible for commercial real estate to make a profit. I mean, Mike and I could develop that and make a profit. So this is another...
And you two don't regularly agree on everything.
No. And this is a classic example of the government sector, the state sector, Mike and I agree, taking money from poor people and giving it to rich people. The tax increment financing should go to the west side and the south side. We should be rebuilding neighborhood schools and neighborhood parks. The yuppies and vegans and my neighbors in Lincoln Park do not need tax breaks to make some kind of commercial development possible. And it's a beautiful part of Chicago for a park, a large park, and mixed-use housing and subsidized housing. Also in Lincoln Park, as you probably know, the Lincoln Commons, the new properties where the old Children's Hospital have just come online with high-rises and shopping centers. So Lincoln Park is pretty well provided with high-end shopping and high-end real estate. What Chicago needs to be a more balanced economy, to be a more attractive city for normal people, for working-class people, is mixed-use housing, parks, and simple retail.
Let me shift to the more conservative side of this table. Do your fellow conservative economists agree with you on this?
I think so. Most conservatives that I speak to do not like government intervention. They don't like people picking winners and losers. And if you think about it, maybe with the population of Chicago and Cook County and Illinois declining, maybe the last thing we need is a commercial development. And so maybe if this doesn't make sense by itself, maybe it makes no sense. Maybe a park would be better. Yeah. Maybe some kind of mixed housing for what we would call affordable housing makes more sense. Maybe there isn't exactly more rich land on this particular site.
So there's
let me piggyback on what Mike has said. One of the issues in Chicago is people moving out, middle class people of color. White working class that can't afford high rises on Michigan Avenue or high rises in Lincoln Park. So what we need to rebalance the economy is more mixed-use housing, more middle income, more working class housing for typical Chicago, and so they don't leave for the suburbs or leave for Texas or Arizona.
If you're going to support it all, if you're going to have such tax benefits, you should do it that way as opposed to the
We have a new mayor, we have a new governor. They have each a progressive so-called agenda. As you are watching and feeling your way through this state's economy and the city's economy, what do you see happening, Mike?
Well, I'm not very optimistic about what's happening. The state is broke, and it's broken. It doesn't know how to run. All these workers whose pensions are the source of many of our problems, they've been promised this their whole lives. We have no right to take it from them. They've planned their whole life around those pensions. But what's the alternative when there's no money put aside? And there can only be one alternative, and that's to raise taxes. So I know that the governor wants to go into a progressive tax, that someday I hope to retire, no, not yet, and retirement income supposedly is not taxed. I'm sure that's going to be the case. And it also will be more than enough to push me out of the state. So I think there will be, the state is in trouble, is in very big trouble.
What state will you go to, since most states have a tax on retirement income? I think only 3 don't, right?
Yeah, but I have family in West Washington State, and they have mountains, which are much nicer than the flat area here. But I just don't feel like everything will have to be taxed, and taxes are going to have, and I understand it. There is essentially no other way out of this. But it does mean that this will be a moribund area as opposed to a vibrant area.
So are you equally pessimistic,
No,
Ed?
I'm going to disagree mightily with Mike. I think the right idea is a progressive income tax. This is not something radical or new or untried. Minnesota has this. My first teaching job, I was a resident of St. Paul, Minnesota. Their recently elected governor has initiated tax increases of the kind that Governor Pritzker has forecast or has advocated, and their fiscal system has improved tremendously. They have revenue, and I think that's the way to go. Now, there was a recent Bloomberg study of growing cities, and Los Angeles and New York City are growing faster than Chicago. So if you think that taxes hurt growth, move to California or move to New York City, and there you'll see real taxes.
Now, what I'm going to say is focused upon the national level. But the research seems to be locked in that when you have to have austerity, you have a choice between cutting spending or raising taxes. And the most damaging thing you can do is raise taxes. Cutting spending is much less damaging. Christina Romer and her husband had come up with a paper which argued this, and some new work which came out involving countries all throughout Europe has come to exactly the same conclusion. You're not going to tax yourself into prosperity. You're going to tax yourself into the point that we cannot compete with Michigan and Indiana and Iowa and so forth, and the jobs will
go. I didn't say we're going to tax ourselves into prosperity. I said we're going to tax ourselves into solvency. And you have to,
on the backs of fewer and fewer people. I don't know how that works. I just don't know how that works.
Let's shift gears to the Fed, shall we? Because President Trump doesn't seem to be happy with the Fed.
Yes.
The two of you I know have certain views on his attack on the Fed, but also on the people who are now populating the Fed. So I'm just curious, Ed, how do you see this going, and what do you see happening?
As I told your associate producer, of all of the appointments of the Trump administration, the mediocrities and the incompetence, this is at another level. The Federal Reserve Board is a very technical, very, very important guider of the U.S. economy. We have come out of the 2008 Great Recession in large part because of the guidance of Ben Bernanke, PhD economist appointed by President George W. Bush, and Janet Yellen, PhD economist appointed by President Obama, and someone with great experience in the Fed. Now we have a pizza guy and a radio yell guy appointed who—
Herman Cain and Stephen Moore, you speak of?
Who really know nothing about monetary policy, and what they do know is 19th century kind of quackery. One of my favorite conservative economists, a person Mike may actually agree with, Greg Mankiw, who was the chair of George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, has come out on his blog, and his message to Republican senators, the people that voted him chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, his message is just say no, that these people are not qualified.
So, Mike, you have the same reservations that Ed has?
No. I probably would not have picked the two that he has chosen. But you know, of the existing 5, 3 do not have a degree in economics. 3 of them are lawyers. 1 has an undergraduate degree in advertising and a doctorate, a lawyer. What matters is the quality of decision making. All the economics is going to be done by the economics staff, and then they bring it to you and you evaluate what you see. I'm not a big fan of Herman Cain, but the man was a successful businessman, and he worked at the Kansas City Fed. He was on the board of directors of the Kansas City Fed. He knows what the Fed does. Stephen Moore has a master's from a free market department, which is George Mason in Virginia. I get that. But he was on the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal, not exactly a schlock organization. He's been a chief economist at CNN. He's been at the Heritage Foundation. Sure, is he to the right? Yes. But what is the quality of his decision making? That's what matters. And the idea that only an economist with a PhD can make good decisions is a preposterous idea.
The fact that there are fewer economists on the board is the reason to appoint more economists now. And if you have faith in the staff, well, who hires the staff? It's the people running the Fed. So if you're a bright young PhD economist and you see the Federal Reserve Board run by these hacks, you're not going to want to work there. You're going to want to go somewhere else.
I guess I would. The personal attacks. I don't get the personal attacks. I'm sorry. Herman Cain, he has his problems, but he's not a fool. And Stephen Moore, I've met him. He has his problems, but he's not a fool.
Herman Cain is an advocate of the gold standard. Stephen Moore predicted hyperinflation with interest rates
I understand.
Cuts and quantitative easing.
He's clearly a supply sider. I get that.
But he's a sycophant. He's an apologist for whatever
so
political.
Let's stipulate the two of you disagree on this. Okay,
yes.
Let's talk about President Trump's tax cut. And now that we're a little distance away from its inception, is it working, Mike?
Well, I told your producer to ask me in 3 more years, because we usually need 3 to 5 years.
Oh, you know, but I got to press you now.
But you've got to press me now. And I have been told by those who look at the strong growth of the economy that it's because of the tax cuts. So people who don't like Mr. Trump are saying, well, it's nothing he did, it's just that tax cut, and that's what led to the growth. But I guess that's what they wanted. It is going to lead to a larger deficit. It has not completely paid for itself. But I don't know how many times I heard sitting at this table and around the table with my colleagues, most of whom are to the left of me, that one thing that was broken was the corporate tax system. That corporate taxes were way too high. We were not competitive, and it was a mistake. Some people, including Milton Friedman, and I think he's convinced me that a corporate tax is a mistake in general, because corporations don't pay taxes. Only the consumers and the owners of the firm pay the taxes, and therefore the idea that we would change the corporate income tax to make us more competitive in the long run would raise our productivity. I think there's something to be said for that.
I'm guessing you disagree?
Completely, right? I think what's made the economy sustained its growth since the 08-09 recession is the relatively wise policy of the Federal Reserve, the stimulus package that was passed by the Obama administration in 09, and I see the tax cut that ballooned the deficit and will eventually lead to some kind of dire consequences, either higher taxes in the future, like President George H.W. Bush had to do for the Reagan tax cut, or it will lead to higher interest rates, which of course the Trump administration sees as very damaging, but their own policies are going to lead to the need for higher interest rate as the U.S. Treasury has to continue to borrow because of the tax cut and the largest yearly deficits in the federal budget on history.
On that note, we must say goodnight to the two of you, but it's always a pleasure. So Ed Stewart and Mike Miller, thank you very much. Much more on Chicago Tonight. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies. lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
Still to come on Chicago Tonight, looking back at 50 years of fighting racism and police misconduct in Chicago. A longtime Wrigley Field bleacher bum who channels her love of baseball and baseball players into her art. And looking back 1 year ago to the Loyola Ramblers' Cinderella trip to college basketball's Final Four. But first, patients with certain chronic diseases and doctors' sign-off can legally use cannabis in Illinois. But will it soon be allowed for all adults? Chicago Tonight's Amanda Vinicky is here with the latest in the ongoing debate over recreational marijuana. Amanda, is Illinois close to legalizing recreational use of marijuana?
Governor J.B. Pritzker sure hopes so. He's literally banking on it. His budget counts on bringing in $170 million from licensing and other fees for this coming budget. But he says it's not just about the money.
I think we should take this action for our state because of the beneficial criminal and social justice implications and the jobs that it will create. And let's be honest, like it or not, cannabis is readily available right now. I would rather that this state tax it and regulate it than deny the reality of its use and accessibility.
If Pritzker is to get his wish, lawmakers have less than 2 months to get it done, given that session is set to adjourn May 31st.
So what is the status now? Has any legislation been moved?
Nothing substantive. The two Democratic legislators who've really been taking up the mantle on this say the plan is to get a package introduced by the end of this month, and then they hope to get it voted on before the end of May. But they're getting pressure from advocates to move it along.
The people of Illinois need smart, sensible adult use cannabis legislation. We can't wait any longer. Every day Springfield waits, it hurts our state.
On the other side are opponents who don't want legalization to happen at all. Some 60 state representatives back a resolution that seeks to slow this down. That's enough to kill a future marijuana bill if every one of them were to vote no. That resolution says lawmakers should not rush irresponsible legislation purely for tax revenues. Now, most of the signatories are Republicans, but the sponsor of that resolution is a Democrat. A few other Democrats have signed on too. Pritzker may be able to change their minds given that they're in the same party. Some, however, Democrats are past that point, including Representative Marty Moylan. He's leading that slow it down charge. He told me he's not going to vote to poison our kids just because it's a small part of the budget puzzle.
So what are some of the outstanding issues regarding whether or not this is going to move forward?
Legislators are meeting almost daily with interests on both sides to try and get this all hammered out. One of those outstanding issues is, should people be able to grow pot at home? And if so, how much? Backers of legal weed say yes. They say it can be overly expensive otherwise. Police say, though, that presents enforcement issues. There's also the question of where people should be allowed to smoke, eat, or otherwise use cannabis. If it's now going to be, if it's allowed in public, where, for example, would tourists staying in hotels use it, renters whose landlords don't allow it be able to legally take or use it?
If you were a tourist and you came to the new legal state of Illinois, where would you go? It really makes sense that you have a safe space to go and consume this. Now, we're talking about consumption lounges, or we're using bars, but that's not really the right word. It's more like a cigar lounge or a hookah lounge. People understand that. It makes perfect sense to us.
Another major outstanding issue, how to handle people who went to jail or otherwise have a blemish on their criminal record for previous possession or selling a relatively small amount of marijuana. It's pretty clear that when legislation does advance, it will include a provision to expunge their records. But there are concerns like how far back should expungement go and how practically can it be done. Finally, there's a debate about who will get to grow and sell cannabis going forward. The businesses that paid Illinois hundreds of thousands of dollars to win licenses under the medical marijuana program want to hold on to those, but there's a big push, including from Governor Pritzker, to make sure that minorities, particularly residents of neighborhoods that have been hit hardest by the war on drugs, he says, can be part of this new business. So lawmakers are considering options like giving a preference to local licensees or to craft growers, people who might not have, a ton of cash up front to be able to get a license.
Amanda, thank you. And now back to Carol Maureen, and the author of a new book about lawyers fighting police misconduct in Chicago. Carol.
Our next guest is a Chicago attorney who has been fighting police misconduct in Chicago for roughly 50 years. He represented the families of Black Panther leaders Fred Hampton and Mark Clark after they were murdered in a police raid in 1969. And for years, he pursued Police Commander John Burge, the leader of a torture ring within the Chicago Police Department. Flint Taylor is a co-founder of the People's Law Office, which was created to fight racial injustice and the war in Vietnam, and has a book now about their work for the last half-century called The Torture Machine: Racism and Police Violence in Chicago. Welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Nice to be here.
And we should say up front that you and I have, over the years, done a lot of different stories, with you on the interviewing end and me on the interviewer end, correct?
That's absolutely true, and some of that appears in the book as well.
You started the People's Law Office really as a student, didn't you?
That's right.
Will you start us at the creation of your original engine of outrage?
Well, the original engine, I think, for all of us at the People's Law Office, which had only been in existence for a few months when the murder of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark happened on December 4th, 1969. And as a student, I went to that apartment where the police had raided in the early morning, and we spent 10 days there taking evidence, and we saw exactly what had happened. We saw the evidence, we saw the blood, we saw the people who came through, and all of that just had a tremendous impact on us because we knew Fred Hampton and we knew who he was, what he stood for, and what kind of a leader he was. So that really kind of was the energizing or such a changing factor in all of our lives and in our commitment that still happens here today, 50 years later.
And the real marker, or one of them then, was, though the police argued, the state's attorney's police argued that the Panthers were shooting out, the trajectory of the bullets ultimately meant they were shooting in.
All of the bullets, perhaps except one. And that's what we saw when we first went there. We saw the trajectories. We saw the Swiss cheese effect of the walls there. And also I remember one morning while we were there and the people were going through to look at it, an older black woman looked at it and she just shook her head and said, "Nothing but a northern lynching." And that, among the many things that happened there, was had a very big impact on me.
So why is this book called The Torture Machine?
Well, it starts out with the Hampton case because that obviously is an important aspect of police violence in the city of Chicago, and that's the subtitle, Racism and Police Violence. But it segues pretty quickly into the 30 years or 32 years that we at the People's Law Office, along with many other people, fought to expose the police torture scandal with John Burge and the people at Area 2. So it's called The Torture Machine for two reasons. First, there's a torture machine. It's on the front of the book. That was a replica of what Andrew Wilson, one of the victims of Burge's torture, described, a machine. That
hand crank electrical machine.
Exactly. You've seen it. The other part of the torture machine, or the other meaning of the book, is the torture machine, the Chicago machine, the Democratic machine. It wasn't just some, quote, rogue officers or detectives that were doing this, but it went to the highest levels of the Chicago machine, in the police department, in the state's attorney's office, in the mayor's office.
Many people have a part in the failure of us understanding and accepting what was going on in those years, roughly 1975 to 1992. And the press we were to blame as well, were we not, in terms of fully understanding that these claims of these suspects, all African American virtually, saying that they had been tortured, they weren't readily listened to?
No, they weren't. I think John Conroy, the great reader, independent journalist, he sat through 2 trials that we did in the Andrew Wilson case in 1989, and he saw that evidence unfold. Part of the evidence unfolded from an anonymous police source who we called Deep Badge, who told us that it wasn't just one case, that it wasn't just some rogue cops, but that the state's attorney, who was Daley at that time, the mayor, who was Byrne at that time, Alderman Burke, all of these people were aware of what was going on. And in fact, what that anonymous source told us in 1989 was our blueprint for, excuse me, for what we have done and in the next 20, 30 years and what's documented in the book.
You've always called this source Deep Badge because you were convinced that she was a police officer.
Yes.
Probably at Area 2 or
yes.
someplace in that vicinity. Did you ever figure out finally who Deep Badge was? Never.
The letters came to me in police department stationery. The information was right on target from the beginning right through the entire investigation that we did. And ultimately we found out that John Burge himself was so upset with this Deep Badge that he sent someone to look for reports that he could try to line up with the way that these letters were written so he could identify who in his former command was sending us the letters.
You've done this for so long, and I don't think I've ever really asked you this over all these years, but at what price to you? I mean, how has it transformed you or in some way changed you?
Well, it certainly changed me from the moment that I stepped into the Panther apartment that morning. And there's been a lot of very intense battles. My partner and I, Jeff Haas, went to jail in the Hampton case, being held for contempt for fighting to try to get the evidence out. There were days and weeks and months that it was very hard to continue on, but on the other hand, we've had a lot of victories. We've had some wonderful clients. The people that we've represented have given us a lot of strength to continue the work that we do. And here I am, 50 years later, and I still feel like I can do and have to do this work.
Yeah, but you could have made money in a private law firm. You could have been more prosperous, shall I say, Flint?
Oh, I suppose so, but I think maybe it's kind of cliched to say so, but you know, money can't buy you the kind of happiness or the kind of respect that you can get if you do what you believe is right. The kind of relationships that you develop when you represent people that are in struggle, who are fighting against racism. And so I certainly have had the non-monetary rewards working with the people at the People's Law Office who share many of the same beliefs I do and the strengths that they have and working with them. I think all of that more than compensates me and my fellow people at the People's Law Office.
And yet, as we marched into this interview, the city was settling once again another huge, $5.5 million amount on a John Burge case, and Burge is dead by now, right?
Oh, that's true. That is one of our cases, and the subtitle to that case is the daily deposition, which has run, as you've covered, for over, 15 years now. He's finally been held accountable to be a defendant, and
Mayor Richard, ex-Mayor
yes.
Richard M. Daley, yes.
Yes, M. Daley, not the elder, but yes, and these articles revealed that, in fact, finally he was deposed in this case, the Alonzo Smith case. Question.
Has that deposition been published?
No, it hasn't been. It's under a very strict protective order.
Why is that?
Because Daley's lawyers, who are paid for by the city, fought very hard, first to have him not deposed, and then to have any deposition that we did of him to be under a strict secrecy order. And at this point, no one has moved to the judge to ask that parts or all of it be released so people can see what he said or didn't say.
So what's ahead for you now?
Well, I continue to do these kinds of cases. As you know, the police violence, both in this city and nationally, is still a very strong issue that needs to be dealt with. And
there's a consent decree now?
There is, and that has to be enforced here in the city. But we'll see if that has any real effect on the police violence and the code of silence and all of the kinds of problems that are documented in the book and that we've seen over the decades that have been in the culture of the police department.
Should we mention that there's another generation going forward? Your daughter Kate is now a federal public defender, correct?
She is, and we're very proud of her. And there's a whole generation of young people, whether it's in Black Lives Matter or in the other organizations that helped us to get reparations and fought to get reparations from the city a couple of years ago, that now that police torture is being taught in the schools in 8th and 10th grades. So yes, there's a new generation, and we're very proud not only of her, but of all these people that have stepped up as youngsters, so to speak.
So the book, The Torture Machine by G. Flint Taylor. Congratulations on this.
Thank you, Carol. It's so nice to be here again.
You can read an excerpt on our website, and Chicago Tonight is back right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
With the Cubs playing their home opener today at Wrigley Field, we were reminded of the story of a longtime Bleacher bum who poured her love of baseball and baseball players into her art. Here's Jay Shefsky with another look.
I grew up by Wrigley Field. I could hear it from my schoolroom. You know, people are cheering, there's organ music. You know, it sounded like a fun place to be.
In those days, Margie Lawrence, like most Chicago school kids, went home for lunch. And she didn't always make it back in the afternoon.
Oh, I played hooky.
And you would go hang out outside, or you'd go in?
We'd go in. They'd let us in for free. But I was in the first grade, so my mom got a phone call. Is little Margie okay? She didn't come back from lunch.
Wait, so in first grade, you were ditching school to go to a Cubs game?
Margie Lawrence didn't start painting baseball until many years later. First, she became a Bleacher bum and went to 35 games a year for 20 years.
I would get there when the doors opened. You'd spend 6 hours there. And it was people who had been there for 30, 40 years already.
The idea to start painting came to Margie in the bleachers. But she wasn't inspired by the players. It was a beer vendor.
I fell madly in love with him, and I wanted to impress him, and he was a great painter. I just thought I could woo him through my painting, but then I started getting all this positive feedback from people, and I thought, well, gosh darn it, I should be doing this all the time. Both my parents are artists, and I guess I wanted to explore that venue.
But it sounds like you also wanted to get this guy.
Oh, I did get him.
The romance with the beer vendor didn't last, but Margie's passion for painting ball players did.
What is it about baseball players
Well, first of all, I like men. And when I was a young girl, I had crushes on ball players. They're just normal guys. They're not, 7 feet tall like basketball players. They don't weigh 350 pounds like football players. They have normal bodies.
Margie Lawrence paints from photographs, some action shots and some casual portraits. But she won't paint just anyone.
I go for the players of the past more than I do the present. They were more characters. Now they're millionaires.
Margie's psychedelic treatment of one old-time player, Sandy Koufax, is in the archives of the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Though Margie Lawrence still lives just a couple miles from Wrigley Field, she doesn't get to many games anymore. It's just gotten too expensive, she says. And while she occasionally branches out and paints musicians, baseball and baseball players, and especially the Cubs, will always be her muse. For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
These days, Margie Lawrence is working on a commission for the Negro League Baseball Museum. It will celebrate the centennial of the founding of the Negro Leagues next February, and Margie is making 3 paintings of the 1946 Satchel Paige All-Black All-Stars. You can see Margie's paintings locally at the Gallery Victor Armendariz in Chicago, and there's more information on our website. Tonight, the Virginia Cavaliers and the Texas Tech Red Raiders will play for the NCAA Basketball Championship. But this time last year, it was Chicago's Loyola Ramblers basketball team making an unlikely appearance in the Final Four. There's a new book called The History of Loyola Basketball, More Than a Shot and a Prayer. It documents not only last year's Cinderella story, but that of Loyola's 1963 NCAA championship squad, which faced racism every step of the way on their road to victory. Joining us now to talk about the book is longtime Chicago sports writer Fred Mitchell, author of 12 books. He spent 41 years at the Chicago Tribune. He's now an adjunct professor at DePaul University and is a community correspondent for the Chicago Blackhawks. Fred, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Phil.
First of all, let's start a year ago in the Ramblers Cinderella story. How did that team reach the Final Four? Just give us a brief recap of their history.
Well, certainly they were a good team in a probably underrated conference in the Missouri Valley Conference. So by winning the regular season and the tournament, they got the automatic bid into the NCAA tournament. They were an 11th seed, and I think a lot of people thought, nice to be here, but they're not going to go very far. They surprised some teams, won a few games with last-second shots, and the momentum continued to build. Became a national and perhaps even an international story with Sister Jean as the 98-year-old team chaplain at that time. So it became a great story, not only about basketball, but about the whole setup at Loyola.
And talk about the Final Four game against Michigan when reality sort of hit.
Yeah, and Loyola led it to half, and going into the second half, they looked to be in pretty good shape. And then there were about, maybe 6 turnovers in a row, and things unraveled, and Michigan sort of took over. I don't think anyone expected Loyola even to put up a good fight in a game like that, which they did.
One of the things the coach has said is he was really high on the character of this team. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think one of the remarkable parts of the story is the fact that not only did they get to the Final Four, but they did it with character individuals. They tied last year, I think, with Harvard in terms of graduation rate. Everybody on the team graduated and has done so since Porter Moser, the coach, has taken over. So he has proven that you can have great athletics and also have a great academic setup like they do at Loyola.
You already alluded to Sister Jean, and she might have possibly suffered from overexposure last year, but she was the X factor. Elaborate on that.
Yeah. Well, she's been the team chaplain since 1994. So we here in Chicago were quite aware of her, but she, got onto the national and international stage last year, and Porter Moser refers to her as their comfort blanket. In other words, she sends text messages to each of the players and the coaches after every game, win or loss. She talks and advises guys, or gives a scouting report to the players before the game, before Coach Moser is able to do that. So she's respected not only on a religious side, but also because of her basketball acumen and experience.
She even had her own bobblehead. In fact, a couple of versions, right?
Right. Yes, a couple versions of the bobblehead. They set a record for the bobblehead Hall of Fame or whatever. So yeah, she's enjoying every bit of this celebrity. She's 99. They celebrate her 99th birthday on August 21st, and is looking forward to her 100th. And she's a remarkable human being. Her recollection of her childhood. She remembers all details that most of us would have forgotten.
Tell us about Coach Porter Moser and what you learned about him.
Well, I learned about his competitiveness. You know, he's a local guy. I went to Benedict County. He's from Lisle, and he's got a couple of older brothers. He said that he always tried to keep up with.
And here he is with Rick Majerus.
Yeah, Rick Majerus was his coaching mentor. After getting fired at Illinois State, Porter Moser decided to take an assistant coaching job at St. Louis University, where Rick Majerus was the head coach at that time. And he said he picked up so much information, not only about the X's and O's of basketball, but also about developing a so-called culture around the team. And this is something that he emphasizes to this day with his Loyola team.
And how has he impacted the culture? Before you answer that question, how did they do this year?
They did. You know, they tied for the regular season Missouri Valley championship, but they lost in I guess the semifinal of the tournament, which would have, you know, had they won that, they would have gotten back into the NCAA tournament. What happened was, particularly in their non-conference schedule, a lot of teams look forward to playing. Okay, if we can beat a team that was in the Final Four, that bullseye on them. So,
which is a good thing to have. That means means you're to be respected.
Yes. So the level of expectations is higher now, which is, like you say, is a good thing. You know, just their going to the Final Four last year manifested itself into close to $1 billion, I guess, in revenue for the university.
How much?
$1 billion, a B, yes. We're talking about over 660%, I think, donations increase from the year previous. You know, the driving force for any university is enrollment. So just the name recognition alone is really catapulted and help the entire university, not just the basketball program.
Well, your book is not just about what happened last year, but the 1963 team. Right. Give us a brief recap of why that's an important team.
It's a story that can't be told too often. A lot of us have heard it. Some, perhaps the younger generation, have not. But the 1963 team, coached by George Ireland, won the NCAA championship. To this day, the only men's basketball team to have accomplished that. And
from Illinois.
From Illinois, yes. And the remarkable thing then, and the pioneering thing, was the fact that George Ireland had the guts to start 4 African-American players in an era when there was sort of a quote-unquote gentleman's agreement that you don't put that many African-American players on the court at the same time.
It was a limit, an understood limit of 2 players,
yes,
is that right?
That's about right. And there were actual confrontations between George Ireland and the opposing coaches after a game. It's like, how dare you do that, sort of thing. So this is, you know, this was a remarkable thing that they did, and George Ireland was, you know, really emphatic about not only having the players accomplish what they did on the court, but he stayed on them in terms of their academics. And as a group, that 63 team accrued, I believe, 21 degrees after graduating. Vic Rouse, for one, had 3 masters and a PhD. So these are guys that all graduated, all did well, both on and off the court.
And I mean, their influence still resonates. I mean, it is a remarkable story, it is a remarkable story in basketball history. Back to the coach and his changing the culture. At one point last year, people were saying, year in and year out, Loyola has the potential to be, say, another Gonzaga. Do you feel that?
I do, and I know that one of Porter Moser's reasons for staying at Loyola, because he was courted by other teams after going to the Final Four, is that he believes in the university, and he knows that a new practice facility is being built, for example. The facilities need to be upgraded, he feels. And he says that schools like Butler and Gonzaga, the mid-majors who have had success in basketball over a period of time, have really invested, you know, both time and money and whatever else it takes to be a consistent winning program. So can that happen? Yes, you have to continue to build. Recruits are very discerning about, you know, what facilities are available when they go visit all these schools. So they want to say, oh, what do you have to offer? What do you have to offer? And so Loyola's, you know, they want to get on board with that. And I think Porter Moser is already established a good standard for it.
You and Sister Jean are going on the road. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Tomorrow night we'll be at Gentile Arena for a book signing. It'll be right after the annual team banquet. So we're talking probably about 7:45 at Gentile Arena, and she's excited about it, and I'm sure she'll agree to get a picture taken and sign the book, and we'll be glad to see as many people out there as possible.
Fred, closing seconds, what do you want people to take away from this book?
I want, you know, I teach a class at DePaul called Sports, Media, and Society, and we talk about the intersection of all of these in so many stories that we write in sports, and it doesn't have to only do with the numbers.
Time, just sum it up.
Yeah, so that, you know, that's why I think it's important to have a story like this that's out there that even casual basketball fans will enjoy.
Fred, good to see you as always. Congratulations.
You. Thank you so much.
Again, the book is called The History of Loyola Basketball, More Than a Shot and a Prayer. And you can catch Fred Mitchell and Sister Jean at Loyola University Chicago, as he mentioned, tomorrow night. And that's going to be for a book signing. You can go to our website for details. And that is our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also watch via podcast on the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. University of Chicago paleontologist Neil Shubin is back to tell us about hunting for fossils in the snowy wastes of the Antarctic, and how your home can help you live a low-waste life. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, proud sponsors of the 25th Annual Clifford Symposium on Tort Law and Social Policy, held at DePaul University College of Law, April 25th and 26th.